Hello, dear viewer. It's the shrimp that actually did fry that rice. Hot takes. People love them. People have them. I don't know where I'm going. I'm always reacting to hot takes, calling people dumb for their silly little music opinions, so I thought I'd give you guys some ammo to return fire. Here are my music hot takes, some super hot, some I threw in to extend the length of this video. Without further ado, let's hop into my first take. Loveless is egregiously overrated. Really should be my coldest take, but I don't actually understand the love for this album. Before you type your comment, at least let me finish. I don't think the sound of this album is bad. I understand its impact on the shoegaze scene. I acknowledge how ahead of its time this album was. The issue with all that is, well, I don't really care. I sit down and I listen to this album in 2025, and truthfully, my only desire is to listen to good music. I think the entire album truthfully sounds the exact same. Is it written the same? I'm not that dumb, but every track here is dominated by the loudest guitar riff I've ever heard, with the most unintelligible lyrics I couldn't even care to read. I think the production is just kind of poor. It's an album I can respect, but never something I'd actually choose to listen to. Billy Corgan is a good vocalist. Good is an incredibly loose term, and I acknowledge that. I more so mean to say he's almost irrationally overhated. He's not your typical vocalist by any means, and I can acknowledge that, but I don't agree that his vocals are bad, not by a long shot. If we're able to praise death metal vocalists for very, I guess, directed talent, I don't think it's really fair to criticize someone like Billy Corgan. I'm not going to call him some monster vocalist, but his vocals are not even half as bad as the internet would like you to think they are. A Tribe Called Quest is better than Wu-Tang Clan. Stay with me for a second here. Who has the higher peak? Honestly, I think it's a toss-up. I'd say Enter the 36 Chambers and the Low End Theory occupy a very similar spot in my mind. Both cream of the crop, both arguable as the greatest hip-hop record of all time. Pretty much where my enjoyment of Wu-Tang ends, though. I don't think they ever reached even close to the peaks they hit on their debut record. Not at all. Everything that follows it feels like it desperately wants to recapture that magic they caught on that first record. I'm not calling it a fluke, but they were just never able to do it again. A Tribe Called Quest released 3 records of that same genuinely jaw-dropping quality. One on the album immediately following the Low End Theory, and again almost 20 years later. That's incredible consistency from a genre I feel typically doesn't have longevity like that. That's why they're better. Echoes is not a top 5 Pink Floyd song. It's gonna hurt some of you, I think, but it's the way I feel. I will say I do think it's a top 10 Pink Floyd track probably, but I think it's a touch overrated. I've seen a lot of cats with this song as their best work, and I can't see it. I enjoy a lot of this track, and it's a fantastic blueprint for a lot of the shit they would go on to do in the next decade, but I think they just improved almost everything on their next couple records. I think the song at points is outright legendary, but I also think at least a couple of those 23 minutes is kind of wasted on this song. Every segment of this song goes on just a little bit too long, I think. And I could certainly live without the whale sounds, or at the very least a shorter rendition of those sounds. I listen to a song like Dogs or Shine On You Crazy Diamond, I feel like almost no time is wasted on those songs. Every moment feels worth it on those tracks. I just don't feel the same way about Echoes. Nirvana has the lowest peak of the Big 5 grunge bands. Big 5, I say, because I even give the edge to Stone Temple Pilots in this discussion. Nirvana's impact on music, obviously undeniable. I don't mean to understate that. But again, me in 2025, I just don't find myself listening to nearly as much Nirvana as I do the other 4 grunge bands. I think STP's Core is a more enjoyable Nevermind for me. A little less experimental perhaps, but I kind of just have more fun listening to it, I think. Alice in Chains' Dirt I give the comfortable edge, but I don't think I have to argue that too much. That feels like a toss-up. Soundgarden Super Unknown I also think is a far better record than either of Nirvana's big releases. I think the production, even just the songwriting on that album is just far more unique at the very least, but I also think it's just flat out better. Pearl Jam's 10, perhaps a little more debatable in my mind. I think 10 probably has the better individual tracks, but I probably do prefer the consistency of Nirvana's work to that of 10's. The other 3, I give the comfortable edge. Album of the Year and Rate Your Music do more good than bad for music. I understand the kind of relationship a lot of people have with Album of the Year and Rate Your Music, but I think if you use these websites like a functioning human being capable of any thought, these websites can do some good. I think a lot of the numbers and reviews themselves can be a bit off-putting, especially on Rate Your Music, where you can search up the Ween song about tying your shoes and find an 8-paragraph analysis in the reviews. But I think the discoverability on those websites is kinda unmatched. It gives you a chance to at least see what a lot of other people deem as good music. Are they correct every time? Of course not, but I think it's a great way to discover more music as long as you don't take the hard numbers and reviews too seriously. Ween has written sadder music than Radiohead. I mean, I think this is obviously subjective, but I do think I've felt sadder listening to Ween than I have to Radiohead. I don't think there's any real scientific way for me to explain it, but I think Ween's ability to go from borderline farting in the microphone to delivering a powerful and emotional ballad just kind of eclipses Radiohead's consistently emotional catalog. Radiohead's bag is sad music. That's kind of undeniable, I think. It's what they do, and it's kind of what they're known for. Ween being an artist you can kind of throw on and laugh at sometimes, and then they deliver a piece that can bring you to tears. It just hits harder for me, and I think they have a little bit of a sadder catalog. Nu metal as a genre has an incredibly low ceiling. I just don't think it can get it done, the nu metal genre. I can enjoy the occasional nu metal track, I might even wiggle my finger, but it's a genre that it can't really hit the same peaks a lot of other metal can. Why? I don't really know. It's gotta be the vocals, I guess. Kinda just the lack of creativity in the scene. At a certain point in the early 2000s, sometime around the mainstream success of Limp Bizkit, I feel like about 850 clones showed up. And while I think many artists have eclipsed the quality of Limp Bizkit's work, I don't think the genre has ever been able to compete and even adapt like a lot of other metal genres. Every nu metal song has that same stench on it, you know what I mean? A genre that I think at some point had potential, but I don't think we'll ever see a nu metal record in the Album of the Year debates anymore. The Downward Spiral is the greatest concept album of all time. Another kind of subjective one, I guess, but I think this album at the very least has the tightest narrative I've ever heard on a record. A lot of records attempt to tell a story like this and kind of just miss the mark. It's been done extremely well, of course, but I don't think I've ever heard a story told so clear and so flawlessly on a record before. It's such a genuinely coherent story and just so powerful and moving, I think. It really just takes you through his thought process, and the degradation of the narrator's mind that takes place throughout this record feels like magic to me. One of my favorite albums of all time, and I think comfortably tells the most profound story I've heard in an album form. Had Eddie Vedder died in the 90s, Pearl Jam would be bigger than Nirvana. I guess we'll never know, right? But the more I listen to early Pearl Jam, the more I kind of think this is true. I'm not going to base Nirvana's success exclusively off Kurt Cobain's tragic death, but I feel as though their staying power within the music scene at least has something to do with it. Nirvana really never had a chance to fuck it up. They released 3 great records and then Kurt died. A tragedy, of course, for everyone involved, but I can't help but think it has something to do with Nirvana's modern success. Modern being within the last decade or so. Honestly, I don't even think Pearl Jam's music is better than Nirvana's, but I do think their music is more accessible. I feel like your uncle probably prefers Pearl Jam to Nirvana, but the modern era of music fans have kind of attached themselves to Kurt's story, which I think is fair, but I also think it's affecting the way people view the music itself. Had Eddie Vedder died after Vitalogy's release, I think the exact same thing would have happened to Pearl Jam. If not bigger than Nirvana, I definitely think Pearl Jam would be in that same conversation. System of a Down has the most consistent discography of all time. Really kind of loose take here, to be honest. Is it flat out the most consistent? Probably not. I think of a band like Joy Division who is, I guess, more consistent, but only across 2 records. Someone like Jimi Hendrix as well, more consistent, but only across 3. System of a Down did that shit for 5 albums, and I could throw on any of those and smile at the very least. I feel like most modern greats end up with a record that's kind of just subpar. Whether it was some experimental piece or a weak debut, most bands like Radiohead or Pink Floyd have at least one weak project, and I don't think System does. And across 5 records, I think that's pretty impressive. That's goat shit. Death metal vocals can ruin songs. Please note I use the word can and not do. I don't think all death metal vocals are bad, not by a long shot. It took me some warming up, but I can say I genuinely enjoy Chuck Schuldiner vocals with Death. I think they work really well with both the lyrical subject matter and, of course, the instrumentation, but I don't think it's irrational to say that some Death vocals can ruin songs. I thoroughly enjoy the instrumental work by a band like Opeth, but the vocals from that artist are really harsh, and I genuinely think sometimes they take away from the music. I'm not asking for every metal band to have some falsetto vocalist, but I think even vocals like Chuck's just work far better within the genre, and I think it's okay to not enjoy death metal vocals. Rust in Peace is better than Master of Puppets. Pretty subjective take here, I guess, but I wanted to throw this one in here. I think at their peaks, Megadeth is the very slightly better band. I just think the instrumental work is kind of just better. For starters, they have a drummer. I also think Dave Mustaine is the most talented musician of the lot, both in terms of songwriting and I guess guitar talent. I prefer the solos on Rust in Peace. The only category I give Metallica the head and shoulders win is vocals, though you could probably give literally any band the edge over Megadeth in that department. It's close for me, both 9 out of 10 records. But I find myself listening to Rust in Peace more. Hail to the Thief is better than A Moon-Shaped Pool. Here to tell you I think A Moon-Shaped Pool is by far the most overrated record within Radiohead's discography. I think it's an incredibly consistent 8 out of 10. It doesn't really have any absolute classics on it, I don't think. True Love Waits being the closest, but I think that song was done more justice 20 years earlier on live performances. Hail to the Thief I find to be a bit less consistent, a couple more stinkers, but it has higher highs. I think 2 + 2 = 5, and They're There, and Sail to the Moon are just outright better than any song on Moon-Shaped Pool. I find myself listening to Hail to the Thief more often, just straight up. Higher highs with ease, I'd say, but definitely lower lows. The White Album is overrated. I said what I said. I've seen people have this as the best Beatles record, and I just can't see it at all. A lot of my respect for the Beatles comes from their ability to seamlessly just connect an album. Every song on a record like Abbey Road or Revolver feels purposeful, like it needs to be there. I don't feel that way about this project. I think it's incredibly disjointed at times. I think it's by far the most inconsistent Beatles album of their critically acclaimed records, at least. And I firmly believe if a project of this quality were released by like a less legendary band, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It just feels like they threw a bunch of shit at the wall, and while a lot of it did land, these are some of the greatest songwriters of all time. I can't say it all did. And I think it really all did land on albums like Abbey Road and Revolver. Shinji Sato is the greatest songwriter of all time. I don't actually have much to say here, I'm afraid. It's just kind of how I feel. I've never encountered a songwriter as talented as Shinji Sato, I don't think. To be able to write Long Season alone, I think immediately puts him in contention. But you look at the rest of his work with Fishmans, and I think it's undeniable that he is at the very least one of the greatest songwriters to ever do it. He's just my personal favorite, I guess. The 2020s have been the weakest decade in music since the fucking 50s. It's a little too soon to call the race, I'm aware of that, but so far I think this has probably been the weakest decade of music in a long time. Maybe it's my personal bias, or maybe I'm just an old fart, but I think songwriting as a whole has kind of just decreased in quality a little bit. Of course, there are still artists delivering incredible projects, but as a collective, I think this has comfortably been the weakest decade so far. I say since the 50s, because I don't actually know what happened before that. Musique concrète is hogwash for elitists. What really should be my coldest take, all this musique concrète shit sucks ass. For those of you unfamiliar, musique concrète is music constructed by mixing recorded sound. Think Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast if you're familiar with Pink Floyd's earlier work, or Revolution 9 off of the White Album by the Beatles. It's a point of music where, to be quite honest, music legitimately stopped being music. I think it objectively mistakes experimentation with actual substance. It is bold to create a song about eating breakfast using 0 instruments. But let me tell you some shit, dear viewer, I don't want to fucking hear it. I listen to music to feel something, to be honest, to connect with the song, whether through the lyricism or the instrumentation. I want to feel something through the music. I think your uncle would answer the same way. Perhaps in a more limited way than my goofy ass, but when he throws on Mr. Jones by the Counting Crows, it's to feel that whimsical joy that song provides. Are you singing Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast in the shower? Are you playing it at the fucking cookout? In the car with your mom? I just don't think you are. It takes everything that makes music music and turns it into noise. It's music that is no longer for the listener. And that's the simplest way I can put it. It's when an artist's urge to be experimental and revolutionize the music game surpasses their urge to create art, and it sucks ass. That's all I have written here. Thank you very much for watching, dear viewer. Please subscribe if you enjoyed, and I hope to see you in the next one. Peace.